The first sound I heard wasn't a knock, it was the cold metallic scrape of a key sliding into our front lock. My wife stiffened at the kitchen table, coffee cup trembling in her hand, and I froze halfway down the hallway, my heart kicking hard in my chest. We weren't expecting anyone, and no one but us had keys to this house. Then came the unmistakable voice outside, muffled but sharp, dripping with entitlement. These people think they can ignore HOA rules. Well, not for long. My blood ran hot as I realized who it was. Karen, our HOA president. The bloated, self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac who thought every house was her kingdom. And she was trying to use a master key to get inside my home. Before I could reach the door, my son Daniel appeared. 19 years old, lanky but sharp-eyed. He had grown up watching this woman torment us fines for garden gnomes, threats over paint color, even harassing our elderly neighbor until the poor man sold his house. Daniel didn't flinch. He pulled out his phone, his voice low but urgent. "Dad, I'm calling 911. He stepped closer to the door, holding the phone high, his voice suddenly louder, steady as steel. "This is Daniel Carter. We have an intruder attempting unlawful entry at 14 Pinewood Drive. Yes, she's the HOA president. Yes, we have her on video." Through the door, there was silence for a heartbeat. Then Karen's voice snapped, shrill and defensive. "This isn't unlawful entry. I'm the HOA president. I have authority." She jiggled the lock harder, her breathing heavy, the rattle of the doorknob echoing through the house. My wife clutched my arm, tears brimming in her eyes, but Daniel's presence steadied us both. He pressed the phone closer to the door, his words cutting like a blade. "Ma'am, the dispatcher is hearing this. They know exactly what you're doing." That was the moment the panic cracked through Karen's arrogance. Her voice wavered. You wouldn't dare. This is neighborhood business." But her bravado fell flat. Neighbors had started gathering outside, their whispers rising as phones recorded, lenses aimed straight at her. Mrs. Lee from across the street called out, "We all see you, Karen. You can't get away with this." A dozen pairs of eyes were on her, and for the first time, Karen realized she wasn't in control. But the real twist came when the key itself betrayed her. She jammed it in one last time, and the cheap metal snapped, half of it lodged in our lock. Her face flushed crimson, sweat beading at her temples as the crowd gasped. Daniel didn't miss a beat. "Thank you," he told the dispatcher. "The suspect just attempted to force entry and damaged our property. Please send units immediately." Karen whirled toward the crowd, her arms flailing. "This is harassment. I'm protecting the neighborhood from violations." But her words sounded absurd now, shrieking against the cold reality of sirens wailing in the distance. By the time the patrol car turned onto our street, neighbors were openly cheering. Phones were everywhere, catching every second of Karen's meltdown. She tried to bluster, tried to wave her clipboard, tried to spin the story, but the broken key in the lock was evidence enough. Officers stepped out, calm but firm, their voices carrying authority she could never fake. "Ma'am, step away from the door. You're under investigation for attempted unlawful entry, vandalism, and harassment." Karen's eyes went wide, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. For the first time in years, she was speechless. And as the officers cuffed her wrists, Daniel lowered his phone, his face calm but triumphant. He looked at me and whispered, "All it took was one call." The crowd erupted in applause, neighbors clapping him on the back, cheering his courage. My wife wept into my shoulder, relief flooding her body. In one afternoon, Karen's empire of intimidation cracked wide open, and it was my son, the boy she once dismissed as lazy and disrespectful, who brought her to her knees with nothing more than a steady voice and a phone call to the truth. The courtroom smelled of paper and nerves the day Karen finally faced the charges. Rows of neighbors filled the gallery, their whispers a low hum of anticipation. For years she had ruled with threats, fines, and manufactured authority, but today she was just another defendant in front of a judge. She entered wearing a stiff navy skirt suit, her hair sprayed into place like armor, her face painted with the same sneer she used to wield at HOA meetings. But beneath the heavy makeup, her eyes darted. She looked smaller, her arrogance cracking at the edges. The prosecutor opened strong, playing the footage every neighbor had seen a dozen times on social media. Karen fumbling with her so-called master key at our front door, shouting about her authority while Daniel's calm, steady voice narrated for the 911 dispatcher. The gallery murmured when the clip showed the key snapping in the lock, Karen's face a mask of panic. Then came testimony. My wife described the fear of hearing someone trying to force her way inside. I recounted years of harassment, fines for garden lights, threats over paint color, even Karen's attempts to shame us at community meetings. But it was Daniel's testimony that silenced the room. He stood tall, shoulders squared, voice clear. I wasn't just calling 911 for my family. I was calling for everyone on our street who's been living under her intimidation. She thought fear was power, but all it took to stop her was one phone call to the truth. His words carried like a steady drumbeat, and you could see the jury lean in. Even the judge's expression softened, his eyes narrowing not with suspicion but with recognition of courage. Then came the twist no one expected. The forensic locksmith called by the prosecution explained that the master key Karen used wasn't official at a lit, was a cheap universal blank she had filed down herself to mimic HOA contractor keys. It wasn't just trespassing. It was premeditated intent to break and enter. And it got worse. The locksmith produced evidence that she had ordered 24 similar blanks, some of which had been found in her desk at the HOA office. My stomach dropped as the implication landed. She hadn't just tried our door. She had been preparing to try every door in the neighborhood. Gasps swept the gallery. People looked at each other with wide eyes, whispering, remembering times they thought they heard rattling at night, times they dismissed as the wind or imagination. Karen sat stiff, her face frozen, but her hands twitched in her lap. The prosecutor's voice sliced through the silence. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a systematic abuse of power designed to strip families of their privacy and dignity. The jury didn't need convincing anymore. They already knew the truth. Karen's defense attorney tried desperately to spin it. He claimed she was checking for safety violations, that she never intended to enter without consent. But then a final witness stood, Officer Hale. He described arriving on scene that day, the broken key still jammed in the lock, Karen's shrieking denial, the crowd of neighbors filming every second. And then he added something we hadn't known. When she was searched, they found a list in her pocket. A handwritten list of addresses in the neighborhood, with notes scribbled beside each 1-inch illegal paint color, trash cans, suspicious noise. Our house was just the first name. She had planned a crusade. The jury returned in less than 2 hours. Guilty on all counts: attempted unlawful entry, criminal trespass, harassment, and possession of burglary tools. The judge's sentence was swift: 2 years in county jail, 5 years probation, permanent removal from the HOA board, and restitution to every household she had wronged. As the gavel slammed, Karen slumped in her chair, her mouth opening and closing with no words left to throw. Deputies cuffed her as the gallery erupted in applause. For once, her shrieks didn't drown out the voices of the people she had silenced for so long. But the story didn't end in the courtroom. Something extraordinary happened in the weeks that followed. The HOA, stripped of its corrupt leader, collapsed under community vote. In its place, the neighbors formed a volunteer association, not to police or punish, but to support one another. People who hadn't spoken in years began gathering on porches, sharing meals, swapping tools. Gardens bloomed without fear of fines. Kids rode bikes without being scolded for chalk drawings. The cul-de-sac felt alive again. At the center of it all was Daniel. He never sought attention, never bragged about his role, but the neighbors wouldn't let him fade quietly. They called him the 9/11 Marine, even though he laughed at the nickname. Mrs. Lee, the elderly widow Karen once tormented, baked him pies every week. Parents pointed him out to their kids, telling them, "That's the young man who stood up for us all." And though he shrugged it off, I saw the pride in his eyes. He had come home carrying burdens from overseas, quiet and heavy, but in defending his own door, he found a way to heal and to lead. One warm evening, the neighborhood gathered on our lawn for a block party. Music floated in the air, children ran barefoot on the grass, and laughter rolled like thunder through the street. As the sun set, neighbors unveiled a wooden plaque they had carved together. The inscription read, "Here a family stood against fear. Here a son called for truth. And here, a community found its voice again." Daniel shook his head, embarrassed, but I saw the tears in his eyes as the crowd cheered. My wife hugged him tight, whispering, "You gave us all back our home." Karen thought a master key would open every door. Instead, it locked her into a cage of her own arrogance. She underestimated the power of truth, the strength of a family, and the courage of a young man who refused to be intimidated. So I'll leave you with this question. When leaders abuse their power and cross into people's homes, is prison time enough, or should communities themselves set stronger protections to make sure no one like Karen can ever rise again?